I understand you hate the president. I understand you love all of these rulings against him. You and I both know that's not a principle. You're a lawyer. What's the principle that divides when issuing a nationwide injunction is okay when it's not? When the Biden administration was subject to nationwide injunctions, you said that they were travesties for the principle of democracy. You didn't say the referral to Judge Kaczmarek was a travesty. You said his injunction was a travesty for principles of democracy.
Yeah. I'm not willing to leave without relief non-parties who are
injured.
No,
you're not willing to leave without the ability to bind President Trump.
No, I
right?
think that...
I mean, when it's Biden, it's okay. No. When it's Biden, oh, it's a travesty. When it's Trump in office, it's, oh, no holds barred, whatever it takes, right?
I believe in a powerful...
What was it that President Biden's staff said? We've got to do undemocratic, unconstitutional things to save democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel where we fight for constitutional principles and expose the deep state's war on conservative values. Today, we're diving deep into a Senate Judiciary hearing that perfectly exposes the left's complete hypocrisy when it comes to judicial activism and the rule of law. Before we get started, make sure you smash that like button if you believe in constitutional conservatism and the America First agenda. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our content exposing the radical left's assault on our republic. And if you want to support real patriotic content that the mainstream media won't cover, head over to patreon.com/AmericaFirst where you can support our mission for as low as $5 a month. Now let's talk about what we just witnessed in this Senate hearing with Professor Shaw, because folks, this is a masterclass in leftist hypocrisy and exactly why we can't trust the academic elite or the judicial establishment. Senator Josh Hawley absolutely destroyed this professor's credibility and exposed the entire game that these people are playing with our constitutional system. What we're looking at here is the weaponization of our federal court system, and it's been going on for years. These nationwide injunctions that can be issued by a single federal judge have become the left's favorite tool to stop any conservative policy they don't like. Think about it. One activist judge in Hawaii or California can essentially become a super-legislature and override the will of the American people as expressed through their elected president.
It's great to have this hearing. Thanks for calling it. Thanks to all of our witnesses for being here. Professor Shaw, nice to see you again. Let me just start with you, if I could, Professor Shaw. You talked about the fact that there have been lots of rulings against the Trump administration. That's absolutely statistically true. I disagree with almost all of them. In fact, I think all of them. But the issue of this hearing really isn't the rulings, is it? It's the remedies. Would you agree? And those are distinct things. You may think that the ruling is quite correct, but that's actually not what we're talking about here today. We could have a hearing on that. Maybe we should. But we're talking today about the remedy. And the question is a remedy that binds parties who are not before the court, is that an appropriate thing? I mean, aren't you concerned about judges binding non-parties in their remedies? You may love the ruling, but even if you do, don't you think it's a little bit anomalous for courts to be going out there and binding parties who are not before them? I mean, is that something we want to encourage?
Senator, I think that judges have been issuing rulings that impact non-parties since Marbury versus Madison, right?
So you're not concerned about it?
I'm not. I absolutely think that they can be abused, and they have been abused.
Wait a minute. You were very concerned about it just a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
You said in response to a nationwide injunction on the Biden FDA's mifepristone rules, and I quote, "This injunction's a travesty for principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law."
I think I've been consistent today. That was issued by Judge Kaczmarek in a single judge division. They're a problem. Those are a problem.
With him personally? Wait,
no.
So your testimony is if it's issued by Judge Kaczmarek, it's bad?
No, sir.
It's personal?
That is not my testimony.
Is the problem with the injunction? You were criticizing the universal injunction
issued by a judge in a single judge division. I've been very clear today that those are a problem.
By a Republican judge in a Republican division, then it's bad.
No, Senator.
Otherwise, it's fine.
No, Senator. I think that single judge divisions are a problem.
What is the principal difference? I'm looking for a principle. I understand you hate the president. I understand you love all of these rulings against him. You and I both know that's not a principle. You're a lawyer. What's the principle that divides when issuing a nationwide injunction is okay when it's not? When the Biden administration was subject to nationwide injunctions, you said that they were travesties for the principle of democracy. You didn't say the referral to Judge Kaczmarek was a travesty. You said his injunction was a travesty for principles of democracy. Yeah. So, in other words, the translation is just you didn't like the outcome. Is that right?
No, Senator. Look, we're talking about, I don't think Article 3 precludes this form of relief. So we are talking about prudential considerations.
Prudential meaning political?
No,
Then
no.
give me, so far I have yet to hear it. You've been questioned by multiple senators. I have yet to hear a principle other than the fact when you like the ruling, you think it's great to apply it nationally, including non-parties. When you don't like the ruling, it is a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law.
Look, Senator, I'll say I think I am self-aware enough to know that my view of the underlying legal question, I am sure colors my perception of the remedy. I think that we should all acknowledge that. And yet I do think
And
that
why shouldn't we stop nationwide injunctions for everybody?
I think there
That's
is
what we're talking about today.
because I'm not willing to leave without relief non-parties who
No,
are
you're
injured.
not willing to leave without the ability to bind President Trump.
No, I
right?
think that
I mean, when it's
believe-
Biden, it's okay.
No.
When it's Biden, oh, it's a travesty. When it's Trump in office, it's, oh, no holds barred, whatever it takes, right?
I
It's
believe
just
in
like
a
that
powerful
book,
no.
What was it that President Biden's staff said? We've got to do undemocratic, unconstitutional things to save democracy. Why is
believe
this the same
I believe
thing?
in a powerful president. I do believe in presidential power, but power and constraint are not at fundamental odds.
What
Constraint
is the
legitimates
principle?
power.
What is the principle? The legal principle. You've referenced prudence. You've referenced the judges you don't like. What's the principle of when an injunction binding non-parties, which was never done in this country before the 1960s? And let's see the chart, the Trump chart, which was done really only once Trump came into office for the first time. You don't think this is a little bit anomalous? You don't think that's a little bit strange?
A very plausible explanation, Senator, you have to consider is that he is engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents, right?
You don't think
you must
this
concede that
was
as a
never
possibility.
used before the 1960s, and suddenly Democrat judges decide we love the nationwide injunction, and then when Biden comes to office, no, actually.
It's Republican appointees as well, Senator.
like
And the 1960s is where some scholars begin, sort of locate the beginning
Can you
of this, but
identify one
others.
before then?
Mila Sahoni, who's another scholar of universal injunction, suggests 1913 is actually the first. There were others in the 20s.
The Republic endured for 150 years before there was a nationwide injunction.
Well, the federal government was doing a lot less until 100 years ago. So there's many things that have changed in the last 100 or the last 50 years.
So long as it is a Democrat president in office, then we should have no nationwide injunctions. If it's a Republican president, then this is absolutely fine, warranted, and called for.
That is
How
not-
can our system of law survive on those principles, Professor?
I think a system in which there are
Is
no
that
meaningful
blind?
constraints on the president is a very dangerous system
That's
of law.
not what
and I
you
am-
thought when Joe Biden. That is not what you thought when
I
Joe
think
Biden was
every
president.
president
You
is
said that is
constrained
not what
and
you
must be.
said. You said it was
Absolutely.
a travesty for the principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law. You also said
Supreme
when Joe
Court senator
Biden
agreed-
was president. Wait a minute.
agreed
Wait a
9-0
minute.
with me on
you
that
also
case,
said
to
when
be
Joe
clear.
Biden was president, you said the idea that anyone would foreign shop to get a judge who would issue a nationwide injunction was just judges looking like politicians in robes. Again, it threatened the underlying legal system. People just trying to get the result they wanted. It was a travesty for the rule of law. But you're fine with all of that if it's getting the result that you want.
Sir, the Supreme Court agreed unanimously with me in that case, right? There was no standing. The case should never have been allowed to proceed.
Wait,
and the
what
combination of
case?
parties without standing and the single judge division.
No. We're talking. No, they did not. They did not issue a ruling on the nationwide injunction. You criticized the injunction nationwide. Listen,
Issued in a case
we
where
can go
no
round
one
and
had
round on this.
standing.
Here's the thing. We've now gone 6 minutes, and Senator Kennedy had you for 6 or 7. You couldn't identify a single principled basis. We all know the truth here, which is it's not just you. It's most of my colleagues over here on this side of the aisle, who I respect a great deal, and they were raising very principled objections to the nationwide injunction just 6 months ago, maybe 9 now. And you're probably right. My point is that all that's changed in 9 months is the occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I realize that my colleagues on this side of the aisle very much dislike that individual, and I realize that you think that the rulings that he has lost are fundamentally sound. We might grant all that. I disagree with all of that, but we can put that to one side. The question we're talking about here is, should judges, single judges, district court judges, be able to bind non-parties who are not in front of them? And you used to say no, now you say yes. Let's be consistent. I would just suggest to you our system of government cannot survive if it's going to be politics all the way down. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Can I briefly respond?
Sure.
I mean, you invoked democracy a couple of times there, Senator. Judges are part of our system of democracy. Democracy is not as simple as majority rule. Judges have always served something of a
You would have it be as simple as
function.
majority rule. When you get the majority you like, you're for the nationwide injunction. When you don't, you're not.
Senator Hawley hit the nail on the head when he pointed out that these nationwide injunctions were virtually non-existent before the 1960s. Our republic survived and thrived for over 150 years without giving individual federal judges the power to stop the entire federal government in its tracks. But suddenly, when we started getting strong conservative presidents who actually wanted to implement the policies they campaigned on, these liberal judges discovered this magical power that had been hiding in the Constitution all along. The timing is no coincidence, patriots. This weaponization of the judiciary ramped up dramatically during the Trump presidency. We saw activist judges in liberal districts issuing nationwide injunctions against everything from the travel ban to immigration enforcement to regulatory reform. These weren't just legal disagreements. This was coordinated resistance to the America First agenda that the American people voted for in 2016. But here's where Professor Shaw's testimony becomes absolutely infuriating and exposes the left's complete lack of principles. When President Biden was facing nationwide injunctions from conservative judges, Professor Shaw called them travesties for principles of democracy, notions of judicial impartiality, and the rule of law. He was outraged that Republican-appointed judges would dare to stop Biden's radical agenda through nationwide injunctions. But now that we're talking about injunctions against President Trump, suddenly Professor Shaw thinks they're perfectly fine. In fact, he's advocating for them. He's literally arguing that the same legal mechanism he called a travesty under Biden is now essential under Trump. This isn't legal scholarship, folks. This is partisan hackery dressed up in academic robes. Senator Hawley perfectly exposed this hypocrisy by asking for a principled legal distinction. What makes a nationwide injunction appropriate in one case, but a travesty in another? Professor Shaw couldn't provide one because there isn't one. The only thing that changed was which party controlled the White House. When Democrats are in power, nationwide injunctions are travesties. When Republicans are in power, they're essential tools of democracy. This gets to the heart of what's wrong with our legal and academic establishments. These people don't have principles, they have preferences. They don't believe in the rule of law, they believe in the rule of their political agenda. They'll twist legal doctrines, ignore precedent, and abandon their previously stated positions the moment it serves their partisan goals. The professors attempt to justify this by claiming that President Trump engaged in much more lawless activity than other presidents is particularly offensive. This is the same crowd that defended every executive overreach of the Obama administration, from DACA to the Iran nuclear deal to weaponizing the IRS against conservative groups. They cheered when Biden tried to implement a nationwide eviction moratorium that even liberal legal scholars said was unconstitutional. But somehow Trump's lawfully implemented immigration policies and regulatory reforms were uniquely lawless. What we're really seeing here is the deep state's insurance policy against conservative governance. They can't win at the ballot box consistently, so they've created this system where unelected federal judges can serve as a super-legislature to stop any conservative policy they don't like. It doesn't matter if the president was lawfully elected or if Congress passed supporting legislation. One activist judge in the right district can bring the entire agenda to a halt. This is fundamentally anti-democratic and anti-constitutional. Article 3 of the Constitution gives federal judges the power to decide cases and controversies, not to serve as national policymakers. When a single district judge issues a nationwide injunction, they're not just deciding the case before them, they're making policy for the entire country based on their personal political preferences. The forum shopping aspect of this makes it even worse. Liberal groups have figured out that they can file their lawsuits in districts with reliably activist judges who will give them the nationwide relief they want. It's turned our federal court system into a game where whoever can find the most sympathetic judge wins, regardless of the law or the facts. Senator Hawley also made an excellent point about the historical perspective. For the first 150 years of our republic, we managed to have checks and balances without giving individual judges this kind of sweeping power. The federal government was smaller then, but the principle remains the same. If the founders had intended for single federal judges to have veto power over national policy, they would have written that into the Constitution. The professor's response that the federal government was doing less 100 years ago completely misses the point. The size and scope of government doesn't change the constitutional principles at stake. If anything, as government has grown larger and more powerful, we should be more careful about concentrating additional power in the hands of unelected judges, not less careful. What's particularly frustrating is watching Republican senators and conservative legal scholars get trapped into defending this system when it occasionally works in their favor. We can't be like Professor Shaw, changing our principles based on who's in office. If nationwide injunctions are bad for the rule of law and separation of powers when they're used against Biden, then they're bad when they're used against any president. This is where principled constitutional conservatism matters. We believe in limited government separation of powers and the rule of law not because they always give us the outcomes we want, but because they're the foundation of our constitutional system. We can't abandon those principles just because we might occasionally benefit from doing so. The solution here isn't to keep playing this game and hope we get better at forum shopping than the left. The solution is to restore proper constitutional boundaries. Congress needs to pass legislation limiting the ability of individual district judges to issue nationwide injunctions. The Supreme Court needs to provide clearer guidance on when such extraordinary relief is appropriate. And we need to confirm judges who understand that their job is to interpret the law, not to make policy. But most importantly, we need to recognize this for what it is, another front in the left's war on constitutional governance. They've weaponized the FBI, the Justice Department, the intelligence agencies, and now they're weaponizing the federal judiciary. Every institution they touch becomes a tool for advancing their political agenda rather than serving its proper constitutional function. This Senate hearing perfectly illustrates why we can't trust the academic and legal establishments to be honest brokers in these debates. Professor Shaw isn't an objective legal scholar providing neutral analysis. He's a partisan operative using his academic credentials to provide intellectual cover for the left's judicial activism. The good news is that patriots like Senator Hawley are willing to call out this hypocrisy and demand principled consistency. We need more Republicans in Congress who understand that this isn't just about winning individual policy battles. It's about preserving the constitutional system that makes American liberty possible. We also need to recognize that this problem goes beyond just judicial nominations. Yes, we need to confirm conservative judges who will interpret the law rather than make policy. But we also need structural reforms to prevent the weaponization of our court system. That means limiting forum shopping, requiring higher standards for nationwide relief, and potentially even creating specialized courts for certain types of cases involving federal policy. The American people deserve a legal system that operates on consistent principles rather than partisan preferences. They deserve judges who will interpret the law the same way regardless of which party appointed them or which party's policies are at stake. And they deserve academic institutions that will provide honest scholarship rather than partisan advocacy disguised as legal analysis. This hearing shows us exactly what we're up against. The left has no principles beyond power, and they'll abandon any previously held position the moment it becomes inconvenient for their political agenda. They don't want equal justice under law. They want their preferred outcomes, and they'll use whatever legal theories or judicial mechanisms they need to get them. But we can't respond to their unprincipled behavior by abandoning our own principles. Constitutional conservatism means believing in the Constitution even when it doesn't give us the outcomes we prefer. It means supporting separation of powers even when that limits our own side's ability to implement its agenda. And it means demanding that our legal and academic institutions operate on principles rather than partisan preferences. That's what the America First movement is really about. Not just winning elections or implementing policies, but restoring constitutional governance and the rule of law. We want judges who interpret the Constitution as written, not as they wish it were written. We want separation of powers that actually separates powers rather than concentrating them in whatever branch happens to agree with the establishment at any given moment. The fight over nationwide injunctions might seem like an obscure legal issue, but it's really about whether we're going to have constitutional governance or whether we're going to let unelected judges serve as super-legislators whenever the left doesn't like the results of democratic elections. Senator Hawley understood that, which is why he pressed so hard for Professor Shaw to articulate a principled basis for his position. The fact that Shaw couldn't provide one after 6 minutes of questioning tells you everything you need to know about the intellectual bankruptcy of the legal establishment's position on this issue. They don't have principles, they have preferred outcomes, and they'll twist the law however they need to twist it to get those outcomes. This is why supporting channels like America First is so important. The mainstream media won't cover these hearings honestly, and they certainly won't explain the constitutional principles at stake. They'll focus on the political horse race and ignore the fundamental questions about how our system of government is supposed to work. But we're here to give you the analysis that matters, the constitutional analysis, the principled analysis, the analysis that puts America first rather than partisan preferences first. That's what you get when you support independent patriotic media rather than relying on the corporate press or academic institutions that have been completely captured by the left. So make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you're supporting us on Patreon at patreon.com/AmericaFirst, and make sure you're sharing this content with other patriots who need to understand what's really happening to our constitutional system. The future of American liberty depends on whether we can restore principled constitutional governance, and that starts with understanding and exposing the left's systematic assault on our institutions. Thanks for watching, patriots. Keep fighting for the Constitution, keep fighting for the rule of law, and keep putting America first. We'll see you in the next video.